Hello and welcome to Equity TechCrunch's flagship podcast about the business of startups. Today is Friday, October 3rd. I can't believe it's already October. And I am Kirsten Korosec, transportation editor here at TechCrunch. And I'm joined by senior AI reporter Max Zeff and weekend editor Anthony Ha. And you guys, before we get into deals, I really want to talk about Max's new favorite actress, Tilly Norwood. Max, what do you love about her?
Oh God, this is a great way to start the show. No,
You're just going to get so much hate email from, the actresses and creatives of the world. So
yes, no, this is great because my girlfriend is an actress. So Tilly Norwood is an AI generated actress with 40,000 Instagram followers that caused a stir this week because, well, she's not real. And actresses were upset about kind of the level of attention that it was getting. I think that this is especially interesting with the launch of Sora that happened this week, OpenAI's image generation app, OpenAI's video generation app, sorry. And we'll talk about that more later on the show.
I think it's fair to say that it was obviously kind of a stunt, that basically this startup, Sequoia, they went on stage at the Zurich Film Festival and they said, hey, we have this AI generated actress. We're looking for representation. Obviously, they wanted a lot of press coverage. They wanted people to sort of, they wanted some back and forth about it. And I think they got that, maybe more negative commentary than they were expecting. As Max alluded to, SAG-AFTRA, which is like the main actors union in the US, and I think a bunch of other kind of industry groups basically universally kind of condemned this. Then the startup had to then kind of walk it back a little and say, hey, we don't see this as a replacement for human actors, but just a tool for human creativity or something like that.
I will say this. I think that it really struck a chord throughout all creatives about, hey, these are these really cool tools, but wow, I am potentially replaceable. And I think that the bigger, broader question for society is, do we want that? Maybe we can do it, but do we want to do it? Too big of a question to get into in this show. But Max, what else are we talking about today?
Yeah, so later on the show, we're going to get into deals of the week from Periodic Labs, a new AI lab, as well as Lithium Americas, which is an interesting deal with the US government. And then we're going to get into some big themes that we're talking about, including AI companies wanting to make money, which is new for them, and also how government actions are impacting startups and the venture capital space.
I want to talk about Lithium Americas because this is written by Tim Deschamps, who's our climate tech reporter. And this is really interesting because there has been speculation about this, and now we're seeing this deal come to fruition, which is the US government is taking an equity stake by renegotiating a federal loan into Lithium Americas, which, by the way, is a Canadian miner. But there's some specifics of the deal I think that are worth noting before we kind of get into the conversation, which is they're taking collectively, I guess you could look at it as a 10% stake, but really it's a 5% stake by converting some warrants into the company, and then another 5% stake into this joint venture that Lithium Americas has with GM for this lithium mine in Nevada. So it's sort of like 5%, 5%. But of course, what's more interesting, not just this deal, is that it seems like there's a bit of a trend here.
Right. It seems like, just in general, it's just to put a name on it, like that Trump has this interest in taking stakes in companies. I mean, Intel was kind of the big headline where, again, he was sort of taking grants that the Biden administration had already made and decided he wanted the government to have a stake. And at least as far as I can tell, I don't think we really know what that's going to look like in terms of like, if we, imagine this a couple of years from now, the government having a stake in a bunch of like for-profit companies, and then say you have a company that's competing with a government-backed, Intel, like what is that actually going to mean for you? I think it's eyebrow-raising, if nothing else.
And that's what I think that is we need to be thinking more about, which is the long-term implications of something. I mean, the argument of the Trump administration is like, hey, we're not giving this money away for free. We're getting something in return. And there are folks who absolutely believe and buy into this strategy. But there is the long tail of this, I think, is really interesting, which is what's the limit of government intervention within these companies? Now, some people have compared this I think, in my belief, incorrectly to some of the like the big government bailouts that happened during the Great Recession in 2008. Government did step in and like bailed out, for instance, some automakers, and there was some deal making there. Like, if we give you this money, you have to do this. So there was an exertion of control, but there wasn't necessarily like a direct stake. And so 10 years, 20 years from now, how much of that stake will be, how much power, I should say, will the US government have over an Intel? Will they, right now they don't, but will they have someone on the board, for instance? Will they give sweeter deals to Intel as opposed to a competitor, to your point, Anthony? So to me, it's like interesting now, but really what is interesting to me is like the long-term 10-year, 20-year implications of this.
Kirsten, I'm curious if you can kind of tell us a little bit more based on what you know about Lithium Americas. I mean, is this a similar kind of deal as Intel was, where they really needed some saving here?
I don't know. I don't think that they needed saving. I mean, GM bought a 38% stake in this company. There was some concern that due to prices falling, that this was at risk. But to me, this felt like just an argument that was being used in the short term. A lot of these big energy deals or mining deals, you're not just looking at the current market conditions. You're really looking out over 10, 20, 30 years. I mean, that's how fossil fuel companies work, and mining companies as well. And they do this so that they aren't necessarily putting a project at risk based on fluctuations in the market of like lithium prices. But that is the argument that's being used. Whether that is just a debating tactic, I think that there's some merit in that, and not so much that this deal is at risk. I will say one thing though, which is that because EV adoption, and of course, lithium mines are often tied to, the demand for EVs. There's still demand, but it's slowed. There have been a lot of automakers who have like stepped back or stopped or paused, delayed production on EVs, killed off models, changed some factory plans. And, you could say potentially, well, does this mean that this is a risk for this mine as well? I don't see that necessarily. I should also mention that the government has also taken a stake in MP Materials, which is a really interesting company that I covered years and years ago. And they are pretty much the only rare earth minerals mine in the United States. And you can see why a country would want to do that, right? Because we're heavily reliant on rare earths for all sorts of things, including smartphones.
Right. I think part of the context here, it was, and these are things I really had not thought about until this year, but as sort of, trade tensions started to escalate between China and the US, that there have been, all these articles highlighting the importance of rare earth minerals to the tech industry. And, you don't think about it until suddenly, our access to some of those minerals is in threat. My sense is that you mentioned lithium for EVs, but this is also important for smartphones. I mean, is this something that's like pretty widespread in its usage in the tech industry?
Oh, yeah, absolutely important. I mean, lithium is actually abundant in the world, but it does take effort and money to mine it. And so it is absolutely important. And if the goal is to build up domestic manufacturing and become less reliant on foreign countries, is absolutely important. I think the question is, how do we go about that? Do we do it through regulatory requirements? Do we do it through incentives and subsidies? Or do we do it through the US government taking direct stakes in these companies? So there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. I think that there's some differences of opinion on how you accomplish that. But we need to talk about this other deal, which I think Max has a lot to say about, but it's this Periodic Labs, which has the most insane seed round I've ever heard of a company. I think maybe the largest.
Well, not quite the largest, I will say, because Mira Murati's Thinking Machines Lab, I think that was the largest. I believe it was
that's right.
Close to $1 billion. But yeah. Anthony, you kind of dug into some of the details around this, and I'd love to kind of hear just what are the brass tacks of this deal?
I want to make sure I don't leave off anyone, because this is kind of a crazy list of investors. So let me look at the notes here. So it's a $300 million seed round. Andreessen Horowitz, DST, Nvidia, Excel, Elad Gil, Jeff Dean, Eric Schmidt, and Jeff Bezos all invested. This is one of those startups where when you hear the pitch, you're just like, well, Yeah, if they can do that, that would be incredible. And so the pitch is essentially automating scientific discovery, and partly leading off from this idea that essentially right now the generative AI that we use is trained on the internet, and we've kind of exhausted that as a source of knowledge. But great, can we now basically use AI to create automated versions of the labs where scientific discovery is happening? And that becomes kind of the next big frontier for AI. So, Max, I imagine you have some opinions about this.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is not the first AI for science lab that we've seen pop up. There were other labs like this. Lila Sciences comes to mind as one of the examples. Future House, too. I believe there are some others out there that are trying to kind of create AI systems that can come up with novel scientific discoveries. I also just think that it's worth pointing out that, there's AI models can't do this today. I mean, there's a lot of work being done towards this. Google's made a lot of progress with AlphaFold, but I mean, this is still really kind of they're chasing super intelligence. Really, is what we're talking about. Like, if AI can come up with new science, like that is, to a lot of people that's a kind of super intelligence of an AI system. And so this is really a bold bet that all of them are making, and it's very much in the realm of OpenAI and Anthropic and these kind of big AI labs.
I think it's worth noting too that they use a kind of a interesting word to me, or a word I think that's going to catch a lot of attention, which is AI scientists, which to me feels like replacing people, right? And to the nod of like super intelligence. But I think there's some nuanced differences that maybe, Max, you can weigh on a little bit because of your familiarity with AI, which is you mentioned some startups, but there are companies that are using AI modeling to help with drug discovery. I could think of another startup, Aonics, that is using, their whole thing is building custom models based on scientific, papers and existing materials, not just scraping the internet, to help specifically speed up the discovery of the electrolyte that sits in between the anode and the cathode in a battery. So kind of like a drug discovery, but for batteries. So this exists, but what they're trying to do feels different to me. And is that fair?
Yeah, I would say that's fair. I mean, I think that, really what they're trying to do is hook AI models up to laboratories. So, an AI model comes up with a hypothesis for an experiment, and it's hooked up directly to like an automated laboratory staffed with real scientists that can, test out some of the theories that it comes up with. I mean, some of the labs I've spoken to that are working on this, they're starting with pretty practical things. Like, they're trying to come up with like, new types of materials that can like help with like these very niche problems or something like that. I believe that Periodic said they're also trying to come up with new physics, which sounds difficult. But
Yeah.
I think that it does. They'll be competing with OpenAI for stuff like this. OpenAI just launched its OpenAI for Science program. And yeah, I mean, this is, just one of the most competitive spaces now.
I mean, my sense reading the coverage and just looking at their website is also this is kind of one of those classic seed announcements where there's a big vision that's being presented and they're not necessarily sharing a lot of details yet about how they're actually achieving any of these things, how many of, whether they've actually built anything yet, or really it's been about, assembling the team. I think one thing that was very, I guess maybe impressive is not quite the right word, but it certainly assuaged some of my skepticism, was that if you look at the team they've assembled, certainly there's a lot of people from the AI world. One of their founders, came from Google DeepMind, where they actually worked on a tool that discovered a bunch of new crystals. But also there are a lot of people from the materials science world. They have like a scientific advisory board. So this isn't just, a bunch of AI people saying, hey, we can reinvent science, and we don't actually know anything about how science is conducted in the laboratory. This is something where they've gotten some scientists on board to, at least explore the possibilities.
This is one of the big things about Periodic Labs, is that they have assembled this team of former OpenAI and Google DeepMind and Meta researchers. It was actually interesting to see, given all the news this week, that, what one researcher at Periodic Labs said, if you want to come build AI for science instead of the infinite AI TikTok slot machine, please come join us at Periodic Labs, which I thought was a great advertisement for them. It's also a great transition to what we're going to talk about next, which is about how AI companies are starting to make money. And sometimes that looks like the AI TikTok slot machine. So just to start us off, Kirsten, I'm curious, did you see some of the new kind of AI powered TikTok competitors that came out this week?
The videos that have been used or have been produced using these tools have been a little bit disturbing. I think probably the one that like stuck with me the longest in a bad way was, so I'm talking about Sora 2. This is OpenAI's product. And one of our reporters had a great story about it. And she used the word terrifying. But the video that I'm thinking of is these pigs eating, and there's like sound in there too. And then Sam Altman, an AI generated version of him, looks at the camera and says something about like, are you enjoying your AI slop or something to that effect? And it's disturbing on like various levels. I'm sure that there are even worse videos out there that will sit with me longer, but like this stuck with me all day, like this image. So yes, I am, to answer your question, familiar with these new products.
As we talk about it, I do want to push back slightly on the way we're framing it, in the sense that I do assume that part of the reason that OpenAI has launched the Sora app is that the hope that they will monetize it at some point. But actually, right now, this is actually just another thing they're spending money on. And as I think you mentioned in your coverage, this is a free app that they might start charging, money to people who want to make a ton of videos. But right now, this is actually not being monetized. But we can definitely see what the path might be. I think one of the other stories this week was about how Meta is basically saying, hey, we're going to use all your AI chatbot data for targeted ads. And also, by the way, you cannot opt out of it. So I think this is definitely the direction we're going in. But OpenAI is not actually monetizing this right now.
To pull it back just a second, to me, this is really, I don't think that we're at this like big transition moment quite yet. But because I think things are happening at the same pace, which is the first phase of AI and the buzzy sort of like ecosystem of what was happening in AI is tons of companies raising money, and few of them, specifically like OpenAI, having incredible raises, incredible raises, and also crazy valuations. Like OpenAI, I believe now is valued at $500 billion. And then there's a ton of other smaller AI startups, all chasing the same thing, all chasing money. At the same time now, we're starting to see some of these companies going, we should probably figure out a way to make money off of this. And to me, that path is less clear, but you are seeing a lot of experimentation. And to Anthony's point, it feels like, let's just see what sticks kind of moment. And I'm wondering if either one of you have seen any products that have come out, maybe they're free, but you see an actual pathway to revenue.
I think that the case for Sora making revenue is pretty clear to me. Like, I think that it looks like TikTok, it looks like Reels. It's going to make money in the same way that those will. OpenAI has not announced, that it's going to monetize it, that it's going to put ads in it. But you can see, like, I don't know, like if it, looks like a duck, sounds like a duck, then it's a duck. Like, these things look like what they are. I think that, more broadly, I think you're right, Kirsten. I think what we saw this week was a lot of companies are kind of laying the foundation for ways that they're going to make money in the future. We've also seen OpenAI create this new kind of Discover-like feed called Pulse that generates you kind of these morning briefings. And that is another surface that people think will be a place they put ads in the future. So I do think that there are a lot of kind of paths here to actually, generating some revenue. But we're not quite there yet, where they're flipping the switch to turn on the ads, to turn all of this, into motion.
I mean, I think one of the steps, in order for it to actually become a big moneymaker is obviously a lot of us would have to sign up and start using Sora. I will admit, as an old cranky person, just reading the description, seeing the videos that Amanda posted, particularly in her article, I was just like, no, thanks. This is not for me. I don't like this. That to me, it felt like something that was going to be taking all the things that I already kind of don't like in social media in terms of the amount of deepfakes, AI slop content. And it's like all the stuff I don't like, very little of the things I do like. And so I feel very kind of disenchanted and skeptical, but I'm curious if either of you feel differently.
Oh, I feel the same. But here's my question, I guess, which piggybacks on what you were just saying, which is it feels like there isn't going to be infinite uses for just creating AI slop videos. Like it's going to have to evolve into something different because first of all, there's a number of companies that are kind of creating these tools to do that. And like, what is the audience appetite for this? Like at some point, and people are already rejecting it. I know right now it feels like a novelty and like it's cool to create things and kind of crazy / terrifying things. But to me, at least, there's a limit to that appetite. And so the survivors and the ones that actually make money are going to be the ones that then figure out ways to show the audience consumers how to use this in ways that will like actually benefit them in the real world.
I think that there's some key distinctions between the AI video app that OpenAI launched and that Meta launched, where OpenAI, a key part of it is that you create videos of yourself and your friends. Whereas with Meta's AI video app is you just create slop. Like you just create stuff that doesn't look like anyone. And it got a much more negative reaction because of that. And I think that honestly, it was a really good insight that OpenAI had to say that people like when they look at apps and it resembles like people they know. I have to say, like, I think I am a little bit more bullish on these kinds of apps moving forward, just because when you look at what's happened to Facebook and Instagram in the last, year, it's like they're filling up with AI generated content. And like on Instagram, like people do seem to kind of be very amused by like the brain rot kind of stuff. Like, and it's terrible in some ways, but it is also like this like weirdly indulgent kind of like funny, crazy thing. And I don't know, like I just like see that happening on regular social media. So I understand why OpenAI is trying to capture that on its own platform now. Is any of this good for society? I don't know. I don't think so. But that's not what they're focused on.
No.
I think I have the answer to that question. Although I do, like Anthony, sound like this like grumpy, like anti-tech person, which I'm not. But I will say that I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. I don't think it's going to go away, but I do see already an appetite or desire for things that aren't artificial and real. Like right now, there is a large group of people who are using this and enjoying it and like kind of like reveling in the brain rot piece of it, kind of embracing it. And it's like this moment in our culture. But I think that the pendulum's going to swing the other way. And my prediction, if not that this is a prediction show, but my prediction is that you're going to see people really seeking out things that are real and authentic. And then the question is, how does AI fit into it? I don't think it's going to go away, by the way. Like, I'm not going to be one of those people who's like, the internet is just a passing fancy. But I think it's going to have to evolve because at some point, that novelty wears off, like people start rejecting brain rot. It's just like a natural cycle. So it needs to have like, what is the next thing that it's going to be used for? What are the real tools that are going to make people like live in their real life in a better way? And if it can figure out that and you can monetize it, then you've got my attention.
I think it's a good point. And I do also want to move on to our next theme here, which is a very real thing that is happening right now, which is the government shutdown and how it's actually affecting startups and venture capitalists. Kirsten, you were just kind of explaining some of the impacts that this is having on the startup world when we were offline. And can you just dive into a little bit of how this might affect companies in ways people might not realize?
Yeah, I will do that. But first, I want to ask the two of you if you have personally had anything happen that you were going to do that now, because of the government shutdown, you're wondering, is this going to affect me at all?
No.
You're like, no, I'm good.
Not that I'm good, but there's no immediate.
I had one meeting canceled because someone said they had to go to the airport.
Okay, one meeting cancel, and Anthony's not really sure how he feels about it, but otherwise not impacted. I'm actually I was just about to renew my passport, and I'm kind of like, But to your question about startups, I will say this. So we have a great article, and we're going to have a lot more coverage of this in the future, talking about the government shutdown and how it may impact startups. And I'm going to put the may in kind of quotes because it's only been a couple of days. And really, this comes down to how long this will take. So a prolonged shutdown is going to affect a lot of people. Her article, and when she speaks to a lot of experts about this, is really focused on how it will specifically affect startups. And it will in multiple ways, kind of in the same ways that it could affect companies. But the key difference here is that many of these startups have raised just like $1 million in seed money. That not the $300 million that, periodic labs, they might have a longer runway. So small delays in things like permitting process, like you can think of the myriad of defense tech companies that are out there that are seeking or waiting for regulatory approval, maybe on something like drones or, some other kind of permit. If that gets pushed off a few weeks, okay, a month, and then government returns and then they get pushed to the bottom of the list, suddenly that becomes an existential issue for them.
I do think one important piece of context here is to think about this not as like we're going from this period of, government predictability and stability into a shutdown, but that we're going from this period that was already really chaotic and unpredictable. I mean, obviously one of the big things was the H-1B changes that were announced just a week ago, and the fact that application fees are going to go up by $100,000. Suddenly there's all these workers who are being told not to go overseas or to come back from overseas. And so, that is not to say that, people should feel one way or another about the shutdown, but I think in some ways that's also made the situation even more precarious, right? That you were going from this situation where you were already a bit like, I don't know what's going to happen if you're a startup founder. And now that's, doubly, triply, 10x the case.
Right. I mean, I think that that one thing you can say, regardless of how a company or its founder or its CEO or executive team feels politically, they can all agree on one thing, which is certainty is positive and uncertainty is bad. And every company will say that. And when there is an uncertain environment, for whatever reason, it creates a ripple effect throughout that business. And they have to make changes and decisions based on an uncertain environment. And so you get these bizarre scenarios, sort of these Schrodinger cat scenarios where it's like, if things stay certain, we get this, but also this other thing can happen. And it is like the literal opposite of it. And we're seeing companies, publicly traded companies, issuing guidance like this. And we're starting to see startups sort of reflecting and kind of preparing for this as well. And I should mention that, like, if the visa processing system is frozen, which it is right now, and a startup also is looking at, permits being halted or slowed or delayed, suddenly you're looking at hiring slowing or even layoffs.
Despite Anthony and my experience, it seems that the government actually does a lot of meaningful stuff that impacts a lot of people's lives. Apparently not ours, but other people's. So, I mean, it's worth noting that we don't know how long the government shutdown will really be. The last one, I believe, was just over a month. Sometimes they're a couple days, sometimes they're a week. But a week for a startup, there's a lot that could go wrong. There's a lot of forms they need to file. So a lot of uncertainty there.
This also feels like a reflection of how the startup landscape has changed in, say, the last decade, and especially over the last few years in terms of, I mean, I think for a long time, this is not necessarily the fear of a government shutdown, but just sort of the uncertainty around, having the government as a customer or somebody you need to rely on is why I think there was such a focus on consumer internet startups for a long time. Or it's one of the reasons was that, hey, you don't ever want to be just like sitting there trying to get, the government to sign off on something. But now, obviously there's a lot more going on in defense tech, a lot more in deep tech where you maybe need various kinds of regulatory approvals. And so like, it just feels like much broader swaths of the startup landscape now depend on the government in various ways that wasn't necessarily true 10 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And also I should mention before we shut down the show for this episode, is
just for now.
An area, yeah, not forever. Sorry, folks. No, but one other piece that I failed to mention before, which will also be affected and is something near and dear to my heart, which is IPOs. And so there's been this really great IPO window that has opened up the latter half of this year. And the SEC is, only doing very limited functions right now, which means that any company that's trying to, debut on public markets may also see that slowed, which, for me personally, I don't like that. And I am sure those companies are getting nervous about, do they now change their plans? Is the IPO window closing? And so that is another one I feel like we should mention as well. And on that note, we are not canceling the show, but just ending this episode. In the meantime, you can always find us on social media at EquityPod on X and Threads. See you next week.